Welcome to Don't Follow a Shepherd. I am excited to have Counselor Shalina here from Australia. She's in Sydney, and she's going to talk a bit about her personal life experiences with trauma and her professional life, hoping to kind of mitigate these issues for people who have unresolved trauma. So, welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about your background? You talk a bit about fatherlessness as kind of adverse childhood experience, which is huge. I don't see people talking about it as much, which it's great that you are to educate and advocate for populations that have been harmed in this way, whether it's intentional or not. And so, well, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you so much for having me on your show as well. My name is Shalina. I'm based in Sydney and I work as a counsellor and a criminologist. I primarily deal with those who are facing domestic and family violence, fatherlessness, intergenerational trauma, and also narcissistic abuse or sexual abuse, all of which are my own lived experiences. So that's the reason why I help those who have gone through things like that. It did start with fatherlessness. It started with domestic violence and fatherlessness, and my mom had to escape him overnight with me, and I was just a 15-month-old baby. So I guess my passion for what I do stems from my mother's resiliency and having to, her whole life changed overnight based on my father's actions. And I didn't experience the domestic violence that she did, but I experienced the aftermath of it, which was fatherlessness. And yeah, as you said, I don't think that people talk about fatherlessness enough. Sometimes people don't even understand how fatherlessness shapes them and affects them. And even things like there's so many different forms of fatherlessness. You know, you could have a father who has passed away versus a father, in my case, who chose not to be in my life, versus a father who could be incarcerated. And each of them have a different experience and reaction and trauma attached to it and emotions attached to it. So, yeah, there's a lot of things to understand about fatherlessness, so that we can help those who are going through it to alleviate the pain or try and channel the pain in a very positive way.
Yeah, it's interesting. People will say that trauma is talked about too much, or, they'll label something a trauma that isn't necessarily a trauma.
Yeah,
it's important to validate those who really have suffered and to make sure that popular culture doesn't just turn this term into something so casual that it's
yeah,
exploited. Um, and it's unfortunate because narcissistic abuse has gone in that direction to some degree. Uh, you know, um, but I think there are things that are profound. For example, I thought about the Reiner family here in the United States. The tragedy that unfolded here in Los Angeles was horrific. Um, uh, Perpetrated by the son, but the remaining siblings who are left, yes, they are well resourced, but to think of the trauma that they endured and what impact that may have on the rest of their life. Um, uh, I think if trauma was explained in ways from trauma informed and trauma conscious people, those who are quick to dismiss it, even ridicule it, or misunderstand what it's about, would be, I think those issues would be much better addressed.
yeah.
So anyway, sorry, I'm rambling. So tell us a little more. Have you worked with colleagues? I mean, have you worked with colleagues and clients who have suffered from fatherlessness in a way that you could really kind of reach them? I know that in a therapeutic relationship, you don't necessarily want to share your personal experience, but have you encountered people that have gone through similar things?
Yeah, I have. And I feel that I end up sharing my experience so that they know they're not alone, to validate their experience. Because I personally wouldn't want to go and talk to a therapist who doesn't understand the impacts of not having a dad. So I share a lot about my life or my situation, whatever relates to them, just to give them that sense of like security, that I emotional security that I do understand. A lot of my clients, it could be fatherlessness. A lot of it is actually domestic violence related as well. In my culture, I deal with a lot of the Indian South Asian culture. So because I'm Indian myself and I understand the culture, so I deal with a lot of women in particular who are going through domestic violence. But then when we break the story down, it ends up being like intergenerational trauma because it's, you know, something maybe her mother endured or something her father perpetrated, or maybe her father wasn't in the picture. So many reasons as to why women tolerate the domestic violence, and we end up breaking that down. And when you think about it, some of them do have absent fathers who may be physically present, but they're not emotionally there for the daughters to save them, to protect them, to guide them, um, just because of the nature. And maybe the fathers obviously went through something for them to be the way they are. So we end up dissecting that. So in ways I can relate to the fatherlessness when I'm dealing with domestic violence and intergenerational trauma, and other times it's people who have had similar stories to me. Just depends on, I guess, who comes to me for the support and help that they need. But it's very common. Domestic violence, family violence, and intergenerational trauma is actually very common. It's just a shame we don't talk about it enough. But like as you said, it's we are talking about things, trauma, big trauma, small traumas, and narcissistic abuse. So we are getting there, but I think we need more education and awareness. And I think we need to, yeah, be educating people in schools and in life settings, which we don't do enough of, which kind of, I think, makes the situation worse.
And this is why I like the term trauma conscious over just trauma informed, because being aware in your everyday life or emphasizing that kind of mentality, I think would be so much more helpful in interpersonal engagements. I mean, one thing that's interesting, the Epstein files came out, and it's been reported heavily on the States and actually internationally, of course.
Yeah,
And one thing that's interesting is some of the people, some of the men in particular who were mentioned in the Epstein files because of their transgressions or, just correspondences that were inappropriate or affiliation alone, it's notable that in their history, some of them have mentioned their own childhood trauma, right? And so you talk a lot about people healing unresolved issues so that they no longer hurt other people. The old saying, hurt people, hurt people. Well, it's
yeah,
interesting with the Epstein issue, the victims haven't received the attention, the support that they need. But what's most interesting to me is that some of the perpetrators, uh, while they've been outed for what they've done wrong, as they should have, no one's acknowledging the fact that part of the reason they have perhaps resorted to some of the behavior they have is because they haven't completely healed. This isn't excusing them or exonerating them, but showing where this predatory behavior comes from. This intergenerational influence on perpetrators of all kinds, quite frankly. So because I think people, again, I'm not giving any of these people a pass, but what we're not acknowledging is why they may have gotten involved with people, why they felt the need to rise to these higher places of elite society because they want to be seen and heard and feel acknowledged, and they were willing to sacrifice other things, their ethics, for to get there. So telling
yeah,
that story is also important. Sorry,
yeah.
I go on. I need to be
No,
seen and heard, so I'll talk a lot.
no, that's fine. Yeah, I agree. I mean, you have to be a broken person to do what they do. Like, it's not normal. None of these behaviors are normal. You have to be broken. It's even when certain rapists, they've been abused as children, and as a result they become rapists, which is so counterintuitive because you're thinking you went through something so horrible, why are you perpetuating this any further? But they do, and it's a way of gaining the control and the power back, and they do that by re replaying the whole scenario again, which I think is bizarre, but at the same time I understand.
Yeah, the other thing too, maybe you could speak to is asking people about their siblings, right? Now, that's personal information that you can't just solicit, I suppose. But you'll find in these families, you'll see the narcissistic dynamics where maybe the person who became the predator and the perpetrator was the golden child, or maybe it was the one who was scapegoated so much, right? So we only see that one person, but what tells the story is to me, and I'm not a clinician, but I'd be curious, what were so and so siblings like? Because
Yeah.
was that person pedestalized and they were kind of oppressed? So anyways, you can talk about that if you want or move into different directions on this topic.
Well, with narcissism, because I do think the word is thrown around quite a bit, like every 2 seconds on social media, this person's a narcissist, that person's a narcissist. Um, there's about 8 different types of narcissism, and it's on a spectrum of mild, moderate, severe, and clinical. But the problem is, most narcissists do not get diagnosed, because before you can get diagnosed, you actually have to feel in your mind there is something wrong, but narcissists don't necessarily feel like that. So before we start labeling everybody as a narcissist, it's you really have to try and analyze the patterns and figure out, well, are they really? If so, what type? Is it mild? Is it moderate? Is it severe? There's a lot of diagnosis that goes into it. So yeah, I think people have jumped on the bandwagon of narcissism, everybody being one. But the point you raised about parents who have probably pedestalized one child over another, that can also lead to having traits of narcissism. Because if you've been too, if there's say there's 3 siblings or 2 siblings, but one of them has been praised a lot by the parents, but the other one or the other two have been neglected, the one who constantly receives the praise, in their minds, they will start to believe that they are infallible. They don't do anything wrong. So what does that lead them to? That leads them to believing that they are better than others, and that they are smarter, they're better. But it makes it worse for them, because then they think they can't cope with being wrong. They can't cope with getting things wrong as well, because they've been so pedestalized. And I think that can lead to traits of narcissism, probably vulnerable narcissism, I would say. They're because they don't because it would they would feel insecure if they're not getting the praise, or they get something wrong, or they're looked at in a bad light. So my diagnosis would be they might suffer from that type of narcissistic disorder. I've seen this myself. So yeah, it's very important not to overpraise your children, because that can actually have negative impacts when they grow up, because they can't deal with fault or being told they're wrong. And if you can't be told that you're wrong, well, then how are you going to grow in life? It can affect you later on. Then it affects your children and how you interrelate with your children too. So yes, I just went on a narcissistic tangent.
Yeah, and I think that again, people tend to say, hey, I came from a normal family, and that's their perspective. But every there's a famous traumatologist who will say, every child, no two children have the same parents, in the
That's
sense
right.
parents are parenting children differently. And
Yeah.
so I'm not out there looking to label someone as the golden child or whatever, but I can often tell in my engagement with someone, what what their worldview is and their personal self-construct is like. It tells me, and I'm only vigilant because I'm wary of people who are not particularly self-aware or aware of those kind of behaviors, and they may be uber confident, and it's a little unsettling to me. I'm much more empathetic toward the scapegoats, the people who've been scapegoated, or the lost children.
Yeah.
So for what it's worth. But so tell us a little bit about the criminology. So that plays into your work in domestic violence, correct? Or that's how.
It's sort of I use my criminology background because that's what I did at uni to try and I guess profile what they're telling me, because some of the victims, they don't really understand the types, the forms of domestic violence. It could be immigration abuse, financial abuse. So I guess I use the knowledge that I got during my degree in identifying patterns and what could be classified as more criminal, what is not, in helping the women when they're going through the domestic violence. And it's just, being able to um, guide them. And I've been doing this for a very long time. But the most common form of domestic violence I find is financial abuse and immigration abuse. We speak about physical and emotional abuse quite a bit, which is intertwined, but more, especially in my culture, I found that it's been immigration and economic abuse. And sometimes it's so normal to them, and then I have to explain to them, no, this is actually not normal. That this is certain things that your partner's doing is against the law, especially when it comes to immigration abuse. Yeah, it's gets very complex.
When you talk about financial abuse, are you talking about, well, tell me if you don't mind, what, or the audience, what you're specifically speaking of, because I think it's very interesting. Well, I'll follow up when you're done.
Oh no, that's all right. So financial abuse is pretty much controlling, limiting the spending, your partner's spending. It can be forcing them to go to work when they don't want to go to work. It can be not allowing them to go to work, forcing them to have joint bank accounts, pretty much limiting the financial autonomy of the person. And it's done in so many ways. And I've noticed it's a lot of them have joint bank accounts, but they're not allowed to access money from that joint bank account, or they're not allowed to have their own personal bank account. They're being watched, everything that is being accessed from the joint account. In instances, I've had women who were working full time, the husbands were working full time, but the wife's salary had to go into the joint account, but the husband's salary went into his own account. And he'd only put a portion of it into the joint account and was controlling her money. And it's bizarre, because I think, how, that's the one thing that's yours, your money, that's financial freedom. What do you go through that makes you give up that to your partner? What is it that makes you think that you can't be financially independent? And I asked that question to the victims, that why did you give it up? Like, what went through into your mind? And a lot of them say to me, oh, I wasn't taught how to be financially independent, or he thinks that I'm not good with money, so I just let him um, take control of the finances. In other instances, I say, okay, but what happens if you want to open up your own bank account? What do you think he's going to do? And then there's threats of the abuse, of the physical abuse. As soon as they want to be independent, then they're stuck.
Yeah, and the reason I kind of pause and question, because when someone says to me financial abuse, I think of two things. Financial infidelity, where a partner may be exploiting opportunities to take money, which is something that you're talking about, and what you just described, which is um, uh, uh, kind of diminishing or uh, I guess taking the ability for that person, limiting independence and autonomy,
Yeah.
but through a grooming mechanism, right? So, for example, the narcissistic partner. It doesn't have, I mean, I'm using narcissism as an example, but the partner who says, I'm going to take care of you. You're going to be, you don't need to work. I want you to stay
Yeah.
home and take care of the kids. So then not only, and they set it up so that it seems like a win-win. So this is perfect for our family. But what it's
Yeah.
doing with intention is limiting the person's professional ability and uh, potential earnings because they're not letting them either use a skill that they have or an education they have, but saying, I want you to stay home. And it's very hard to argue with that kind of sentiment because the person makes you feel like you're doing the right thing and you're doing it together. So it's a very,
Yeah.
it's such a means of gaslighting that I think is so uh, insidious and toxic.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Currency becomes the money of love, of course, in those situations as well. So everything's transactional. It becomes a culture of subtle deceit, and so harmful in that way. Sorry, I jumped in again, but
No, no, that's fine. You're right. It's undermining their financial confidence, and it's, you're telling the partner, "Oh, you're bad with money, or you can't cope." So they, as you said, they're gaslighting them. They're distorting their own reality and the way that they view themselves, and they're going to think they're incompetent when it comes to finances. So they give it up, and it's, finances are a life skill. But I asked them, well, what did you see with your parents? Like, was your dad the main breadwinner? Did your mom not work? So they've already seen that dynamic, so for them that's normal. And then it comes out in their marriages, and these women are struggling financially and they can't break free. And sometimes they don't realize that's domestic violence, and then I have to try and explain to them, hey, if you can't access your money without fear, there's something not right here. Like, this is not.
well, and it continues to go on in families where perhaps one of the partners thinks they're actually quite, in fact, the victim thinks they're somewhat aware of these kinds of issues, but the other partner is so convincing, um, uses so much superficial charm to kind of
Oh
set up
yeah.
a scenario where, this is ideal for our family. You won't be as stressed. It's like it's hard to challenge. Like if someone had proposed that to me, I'm not sure that I would be able to say no because I'm like, wow, that sounds so convincing. So I really
Yeah.
feel for these people because they end up in a situation that's problematic, but many other people would have been coerced in the most gracious way. And
Yeah.
it's just tragic.
It is, and it's hard to get out of that situation sometimes. So I find that people always ask, well, why didn't she leave? And it's like, she didn't have money. Where was she
Right.
supposed to go? In one of my clients, her husband restricts her access to her phone, you know, and actually, not just one, a few of them. So they have to be careful what they're doing on their phone. Especially some of them have had to delete my number. They're speaking to me and then they're like, okay, I have to delete the number because if he sees it, he's going to wonder who it is. And if that's going to start a fight. And I'm like, wow.
And that's another thing I want to ask you. How many of your clients find that their partners are threatened by the fact that they're going to see you? Just having a therapist gives them, or counselor, is something that threatens often a partner who is trying to manipulate and control. And one of the worst things that can happen to them is that a counselor comes into play and they have kind of this conduit or this buffer. And now they're a little scared because they're like, wow, this person may be telling my partner what I'm really up to. And they see it for what it is. So I'm sure that goes on a lot.
A lot of the women, they don't tell their husbands, or they
Ah,
contact me
okay.
when their husbands are at work or away somewhere else. And then they contact me. And then I usually ask them, is it safe? Are they around? What's going on? And then they usually end up telling me they'll contact me when they need to because the partner's around, which is so sad that you don't have the freedom to, because I'm available via text as well. It's not like we have to talk on the phone, but they're just not able, they don't have that freedom in their own home to to talk, to text, because out of fear that what is the husband going to do when they find out. So they have to do it when it's safe. And I usually, whenever I advise them of anything, I always tell them, hey, don't discuss this with your partner. Like, this is between you and I, and you and whichever other professional that is involved. When I give advice of, like, you need to speak with a lawyer to learn your rights and the law of this country, I always tell them, don't tell your husband what you're doing, because that's going to piss him off. So you have to be safe. And I always give them that warning so that they know, just don't say anything for your own safety, because some of them are very violent. They go through a lot of abuse.
I would
I've had
imagine.
horrible stories.
I would imagine some of them come from very enmeshed families where they're used to sharing a lot of information with a loved one. And so it wouldn't even occur to them not to share something, even though they may really have the inclination to think, hey, that's probably not a bad idea, but they're probably on the fence.
Yeah, I think that if you're in a relationship where there is abuse, narcissistic abuse, coercive control, domestic violence, it's very important to limit information sharing and being vulnerable with your partner. You be vulnerable elsewhere if that's possible. A friend, a relative, somebody you trust, a professional, if you can. Journal it if it's safe, but don't tell your partner your vulnerabilities and your insecurities, because that will be used against you. And you don't want that. So it's very important to limit what you say to your partner.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. I want to have you back on, but there's so much to cover. What are any projects that you want to talk about or ways to get in touch with you? And maybe we'll discuss off record, some future topics to talk about because there's so many high profile examples in the media as well. Um, so yeah, I think I really appreciate you sharing some of your personal experiences. Are there any fatherlessness resources in particular out there?
There are Facebook groups that you can join where you can connect with like-minded people who've been through the same thing as you. Sorry, I'm working on putting together a resource for fatherlessness myself.
Oh,
Think that's one of the other things I want to work on. At the moment, you asked me about projects. I've got a free resource out on narcissism and coercive control, just to understand. It's just for somebody who might be feeling like they're going through it, they're not sure. This will help you understand if you are going through it. Plus, I also included a lot of coping strategies, how to cope if you are going through narcissistic abuse and coercive control at the same time. It's just a free resource for anybody who needs it. Apart from that, I've also nearly finished an ebook on understanding narcissism and the different types of narcissism and how to cope with the different forms of narcissism. So that's going to be coming out soon. And on social media, I'm just under Counselor Shalina. You can reach me anytime. Talk about anything you want to talk about, because I understand it's tough to find somebody who you can relate to, who's lived in your shoes. So when you can, and I've unfortunately or fortunately, I'm not really sure which way to say it. I've had that many different experiences of trauma growing up, the adverse childhood experiences of fatherlessness, intergenerational trauma, DV, abuse. So I can relate to people on many forms of trauma. I don't know if that's a blessing or a curse, but whatever it is, I'm able to help people. So I think that's what my mission is in this life, to do that. So yeah, I'm looking forward to connecting with anybody who feels like they resonate.
Yeah, I'll send some people your way. I belong to some groups that might be, these people might be interested. So, well, thank you so
Yeah,
much. Definitely, we'll schedule another time to kind of
yeah,
follow up on other stuff. Um, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. It's still morning for you, huh? In
yes.
Australia,
I'm in
Monday
Sydney.
morning. Yeah,
Yeah, so it's 11:30 in the morning here.
nice.
So good start to the day.
Well, thank you so much, and we will talk soon.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope your audience resonates with anything that I've said today.
Oh, you're most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.